General William Westmoreland. Television is an instrument which can paralyze this country. The Vietnam War was the first war to come into America's living rooms. Nightly images from Vietnam show the war more graphically than any newspaper previously had. 60 million Americans lost soldiers, civilians such as women and children, and a massive amount of plant and animal life killed in the Vietnam War. In the view of the United States government, communism had gotten out of control in Vietnam in the 1950s. The U.S. government started to send more advisors to Vietnam, and the Vietnamese did not help as much as the U.S. government would have liked. Kennedy finally realized that the struggle against communism in Vietnam could not be won under Diem's rule of South Vietnam. President Diem was assassinated in 1963, and in South Vietnam, chaos reigned. Shortly after that, Kennedy was also assassinated, and newly installed U.S. President Lyndon Johnson took over and again commits to contain communism. Sent military advisors to Vietnam to settle the communist threat. The U.S. and South Vietnam tried to stop North Vietnam communism and overthrow their communist rule. In 1964, North Vietnamese torpedo boats attacked U.S. boats in the Gulf of Tonkin. Congress passed the Gulf of Tonkin Resolution, which effectively pitted the United States against Vietnam in war without actually declaring war. People say the Gulf of Tonkin actually happened and was attacked, while others say it was a single bullet that strayed, but claimed by some other people that it didn't even happen, and the U.S. wanted to go into the war. Vietnam was opposed by doves and was favored by hawks. Doves were always for peace, while hawks would favor going to war whenever necessary. Many people opposed the war and protested it vigorously. Others were people who tried to escape the drafts from the military in many ways, escaping to Canada, going to college, and even saying that they have physical disabilities. College students who avoided the war often protested against the war. In 1967, President Johnson made the decision not to run for president again. Anti-war demonstrations were making Johnson wary. Opponents of the war were becoming very vocal. It was beginning to look like Johnson would not be able to get the Democratic nomination for president. Rather than facing an embarrassing political defeat, Johnson decided to withdraw from the race. In 1970, at the height of the Vietnam War, the governor of Ohio called in the Ohio National Guard to control the protests at Kent State University. 4 students were killed and the American people were outraged. American opposition was at its highest point. Following the U.S. withdrawal, the capital of Saigon fell quickly. After a dramatic airlift of U.S. citizens, the United States' presence in Vietnam was greatly reduced. The importance of the Vietnam War affected many nations around the area and the U.S. It was one of the first unfiltered in-color wars shown live to the public. The war was one of the longest wars of American involvement until the Afghanistan War. Over 2 million people died, with the majority of the deaths being civilians. Over 3 million people were wounded, and over 8 million tons of bombs were dropped. The total amount of money spent during the war by the U.S. was around $140 billion. On April 29, 1975, America evacuated almost 1,000 American citizens from Saigon shortly before the South Vietnamese capital fell to the Communists. Rescuing them from rooftops into helicopters remains one of the unforgettable images of the Vietnam War. Many American soldiers became POWs, or prisoners of war, who endured terrible conditions and treatment at Vietnamese POW camps. Thousands of other American soldiers were MIA, or missing in action, and their whereabouts were never accounted for. To this day, many American servicemen are still listed as MIA in Vietnam. This issue is still a source of friction between the United States and North Vietnam.